Hi everybody, Mike Underwood here. I'm back from Gen Con. I mostly have a voice, and today we're going to make some new adversaries to use with the Daggerheart rules. We're going to draw on the homebrew kit that you can see here on the screen, which, surprise, I was a contributor to. That was a very fun process. And we are going to adapt some adversaries from the D&D 5e SRD and hang out and chat for a while. So I'm going to make this part go away since I've shown it a bunch now. And then we're going to switch over to this display where we have our adversaries. So I grabbed a template from this link that has just a nice basic formatting for adversaries and for environments. And I put it into my document here, and as you'll see, I grabbed some stuff from the 5e SRD so that we can create monsters, specifically monsters, right? Adversaries can be more broad. Here we're adapting monsters. Last time I did adversaries, we created a blood mage, and so that was more like, this is not a monster, this is a person who you're fighting. Yeah, let's see, there is a bear in Daggerheart, but trying to find a beast and making an adaptation could also be fun DM rollings. So the first thing that we want to do is I'm going to find the section in the homebrew kit for adversaries, and then we're going to talk about this a little bit. Pages. Okay. And then we're going to jump back over here. Okay, boom. Yeah, something that has only attacks and no abilities is a good candidate for adaptation, right? Because then we'll be able to reinterpret it. So we have the homebrew kit over here. This is a free document that anybody can use. You can download it from the Daggerheart website. It's in the, I think it's under the resources tab. It's 20-something pages, 26 pages, in fact, with guidance and some behind-the-scenes looks at things like the design principles of the game, right? Where if I jump back here and go to the very beginning, actually, this is me just showing off the homebrew kit here, right? So this page number 3 in the homebrew kit, this is just the design principles of Daggerheart that the homebrew kit unpacks and talks through, right? So this is a page that just straightforwardly, or I think straightforwardly, presents, here are the things that are positioned as important, right? The idea is that this is what the design team had in mind while the team was working, right? I was on that team. I'm trying to avoid we to not speak for anybody else here. But these are really good things to think about, especially if you are trying to come directly from not having played Daggerheart, getting into the game, getting excited about it, and deciding that you want to jump right in to homebrewing and or to publishing Daggerheart-compatible material, right? Community gaming license usage in publication, whether that's for sale or not, right? And so we have balanced narrative focus and dynamic combat, streamline, then streamline again, make the game tactile, limit cognitive load. That's going to be important for when we're doing our adversaries, right? Limiting the cognitive load, embrace collaboration, design for flexibility, and think asymmetrically. So we're going to jump back over here, and I'm going to get us back to adversaries, and then we're going to do this. I'm going to scroll just a little bit up so that we can see this up here, right? So on Adversaries, this is page 15 in the Homebrew Kit. We have that improvised statistics chart that is in the core book. We have a breakdown of hit points, and this is just, this talks about, hey, so if you give an adversary 2 hit points, here's what that will mean. Or if you want to, if you're trying to figure out how to make an adversary that will occupy a certain space or be a certain level of difficulty to defeat, you could start from this right-hand column and then go, okay, well, but how many hit points is that, right? Minions have 1 hit point. You could, if you wanted, make some adversaries that only have 3 hit points. And so if you land a strong enough blow, you can one-shot them, where they're not quite minions, but you know that a PC isn't going to have to hit them multiple times if that character is hitting hard. And something that I've been considering since reflecting on the Homebrew Kit when it came out last week was thinking about the utility of making, especially at lower tiers, more adversaries that have 2 or 3 hit points, where their job is to be in the scene and maybe make an impact, but not to be able to take much of a blow, where maybe they're a little bit sturdier than minions, right? They don't have that minion feature where if you do enough damage, you're gonna knock out several of them at once, but they're not meant to have that much staying power on the battlefield. I don't know that we'll get that to that today, but that's something that I was reminded of looking at the Homebrew Kit. And then looking at the Homebrew Kit, we've got some information about attack modifiers, damage, bonus, scaling. This scaling section I really recommend to folks who are feeling like they don't have enough adversaries for Daggerheart or to be able to use in Daggerheart, because with this scaling advice, I think it's not too hard to take almost every adversary that's in the book and adjust them to whatever tier you need. Taking a tier 4 adversary and scaling them down to tier 1 may be harder, especially on the conceptual level, but I think if you're really looking to take stuff from tier 2 to tier 1 or tier 2 to tier 3 or tier 1 to tier 2, the scaling here should be able to make that a lot easier. Oh, thank you, Alan. Yeah, this scaling information was in the beta, or an earlier version of it was in the beta document, but ended up in the Homebrew Kit. So there's the full breakdown of taking the Assassin Poisoner down a tier and then up all the way to tier 4. Features, right? Avoid GM overload. This is a question of cognitive load. And suggestions on which types of adversaries are maybe more okay to have a larger number of features. And then we've got a breakdown of some common adversary features, not all of them, right? Just a few to be an example. And then talking about fear features. So I think this is very useful information. This section easily could have been much, much longer, but then I think, and this is pure conjecture, right? This is not exposing the Darrington workflow, but the longer the guide is, the more work it would take to do, right? And so we have what we have. I did see somebody from the team say, hey, did you notice this Homebrew Kit is only version 1.0? So that may mean that it's going to be added to, right? And we'll see about that. But for now, let's jump back from the Homebrew Kit to our monster factory. So during the development process, this is a story I think I can tell because it's entirely fabricated by me. There was a chunk of time when I was just working on adversaries as the main thing that I was focusing on. And in a meeting, I kind of glibly opened my comments with, call me Monster Mike, because today or like this week or whatever it was, I was just working on Adversaries the whole time. And so sometimes when I'm getting back into that mode, I think about donning once again the hat that says Monster Mike. I'm imagining a Daggerheart-compatible supplement that's like Monster Mike's Menagerie. And it's like, is that too much alliteration? Is that, is that too much consonants? I don't know. Anyway, we are going to start with a Gibbering Mouther. So this is a 5e adversary that it shows up a fair amount. I had a hard time as a player the last time I encountered Gibbering Mouthers. They have some features that I don't love from the perspective of being a player. Right? And so this gibbering part, right? Each character that starts their turn within 20 feet must make a save. On a failure, they can't take reactions, and then they roll a d8, right? This d8 determines what you can do. So you really, there's a strong degree to which you lose control of your character. And if you're in a fight where it takes a long time between rounds, not having control of your character can, for me, be pretty frustrating. And so what I want to think about and try to talk through is how can we have a monster that is a translation of or an expression of this type of adversary that like confuses you or like interferes with how player characters act, that for me wouldn't be as frustrating, right? Where it might be sort of frustrating, but it's not going to feel like I've totally lost control. And I have a couple of initial ideas, but let's pull back to the start and walk through how we're going to do this, right? And again, for this stream, this is not official advice on how to do the things, right? We have the homebrew kit that we're going to be drawing from, but these are my interpretations of how we could translate adversaries from that at 5e SRD, or how to build adversaries. This is my personal interpretation. So this is a Gibbering Mouther. It is going to be, right, this is a challenge rating 2 adversary. So I think that's tier 2. And, right, this could be a skulk adversary, maybe. I could also see it as a support because it's really about debuffing the player characters. Hey, hi, Phoebus. Yeah, if this conversion works for you, then that's fantastic. Otherwise, your own interpretation will be very useful. So we're just going to copy the about here to start, but I think I probably want to put this into my own words, right? This is going to be a horrid mass. Right, so here I'm just changing some of the wording and framing, right? A horrid mass of eyes, mouths, and formless flesh, period, staring in all directions, its countless maws yammer ceaselessly. This is just, right, I've changed stuff out of the gerund form. Here's a reminder that I'm not an editor, I'm a writer, and so sometimes I mess up my grammar stuff, right? I'm just rephrasing this in a way that feels like how I would want to have it. And I'm thinking about literally what are the words that I would use if I'm introducing this adversary in a scene as the GM. Motives and tactics, right? So this is going to be confound, defile, consume. Well, we already have confound. So what else are we going to do? Bites, blinding spittle. Right, so we can do blind. I don't know that I can avoid doubling up on the letters here, right? In revision, I would probably look at my motives and tactics and try to not have more than one start with the same letter, just from like a presentation standpoint. All right, there's a little bit of space here that I would want to get rid of, but that's just how the layout thing is done. So yeah, don't worry about it. All right, we're going to ignore that. So if I go back in the Homebrew Kit, this is a Tier 2 adversary. The average difficulty for Tier 2 listed is 14. So we're going to stay 14 to start. Damage thresholds. These things should not be especially tough. So we're going to default to 1020 here. And I'm also going to look in the SRD, and I'm going to go to the the Daggerheart SRD, and I'm going to go to Tier 2, and I'm going to look at a Tier 2 Skulk. So Assassin Poisoner is 816. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this Mouther down to 918 and then decide if I want to bring that down as well. And per the previous conversation, I'm going to set these to having only 3 HP, because I think what they're going to do is they are going to have various things that debuff the player characters, make it harder for the PCs to eliminate them. But the thing I want to keep in mind is I want to make it harder, but I want to make sure that players maintain agency and control over their characters. So we're going to give the Mouthers 3 stress. This might end up going up, right? Because sometimes you want adversary features that use stress. Let's let them have an attack of 2. What is their standard attack? They have a bite. Okay. So, right, this is a melee bite. And I'm just we're going to do 2d8 plus 1 as our starting damage. Okay, anyway. Sorry, because I have multiple stat blocks in front of me, I'm just like doing pattern analysis comparison, like, oh, there's a space over here, and it doesn't matter. So this is going to be, right, we're going to give the Mouther the experience of disorienting. Right, it could also just be disorient. For me, disorienting just scans better for whatever reason. And looking at, so we look back at here, armor class of 9. Maybe we bring this difficulty down a little bit, honestly, if they're only an armor class of 9. And if I look there, right, aberrant ground. This is a great this will become a great passive trait, right? Aberrant ground. So, right, in 5e, ground in a 10-foot radius around the Mouther is doe-like difficult terrain. Each creature that starts its turn in that area must succeed on a DC 10 strength saving throw or have their speed reduced to 0 until the start of their next turn. So Phoebus asks, 3 HP falls immediately to a severe wound. Is there a concern that if the PCs go first, the adversary will go down immediately? Yes, but I think I'm going to build these Mouthers such that you're almost always deploying several of them at once. And if the players take down one, that's fine. The GM probably then want to spend a fear to take the spotlight, and some of these features like aberrant ground are going to create mitigating factors for the player characters, right? They're going to create special circumstances that make it harder to just go in and land a blow. So, a PC moves into within very close distance of the Mouther, they must to... Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm live translating from D&D 5e SRD phrasing into my best first draft approximation of Daggerheart feature phrasing. I don't have like a style guide up in front of me, so these are all first drafts. They'll probably be revised before they go anywhere else. And these specifically are more exercises to work through the process in a way that I can share with everybody, right? If a PC moves into or within very close distance of the Mouther, they must make a strength reaction roll or become temporarily restrained. This does not need to be until they roll with hope, right? So this is a roll with hope will end the restrain. In 5e, right, this is speed reduced until 0 until the start of its next turn. Daggerheart restrained is kind of maybe just an easier way to suggest that, right? They must stop moving. Well, if you're restrained, you can't move anymore. Alan raises a great point here that I was thinking of making, but I can just quote Alan here. One of the things I've discovered in my journey of creating adversaries in Daggerheart is creating groups with interactions. Very few adversaries exist, quote, in a vacuum, unquote. They work together with others. 100% agree. What we might, in fact, do toward that end, and maybe this is useful for, I believe it was Phoebus, you might make several different Mouthers, right? You might make a Gibbering Mouther, you might make a Deafening Mouther, you might make a Massive Mouther, right? Where you're going to have a Skulk and a Support and a Bruiser, where they're one enemy style or faction, but then there's several that cover a variety of adversary types, so that you can make an encounter that has that is more rounded and has a sense of dimension, right? An encounter where the adversaries are a bruiser, a skulk, and a support are about messing up the PCs, right? Getting them off their game and then hitting them hard, right? Skulk, support, bruiser. Skulk and support debuff the PCs and or create and or exploit weaknesses. Bruisers hit hard. If the skulks and the supports create weaknesses, the bruisers will then be even more dangerous. Or the bruisers might put the PCs into the position for the skulks to then be able to follow up really dangerously. So there's a few ways we can do that. So Aberrant Ground, our first feature, is a passive. If a PC moves into or within very close distance of the Mouther, they must make a strength reaction roll or become temporarily restrained until they roll with hope. So this saving throw for the Mouther is a DC 10. The Mouther's AC is 9. So this should be a pretty easy saving throw. I don't know that it's worthwhile from a simplicity and streamlining standpoint to make this reaction roll less difficult than the Mouther's difficulty. That may be something to test. Right, rolling with hope happens slightly more than 50% of the time. They may even roll with hope when they act against the Mouther in that same spotlight where they moved. Right? So that's a passive. The gibbering thing is each creature that starts their turn. I'm going to change that into an action. But this is going to be mark a stress. instead of spend a fear. So, and target all PCs within close distance, right? It's 20 feet in D&D. I'm going to round that up. Yeah, let's round it up to close. In Revision, you might round it back down to very close, right? Aberrant Ground is very close, and so if Gibbering is also very close, then that's useful in that it is consistent, but we do want these Mouthers to be able to make an impact on the scene. Sorry, I'm just going to scroll up so you can see what I'm working on. So let's do close for now, right? And here I'm just trying to verbalize my process so that you get a sense of how I approach doing this. Target with all within close. They must make a... This is going to be a presence reaction roll. Presence, no. In here, this is wisdom. It's gonna be instinct. Roll or become disoriented. And actually, I don't need to say temporarily restrained for PCs because the temporarily status wording for me is something that is for NPCs. Right? You become restrained. Well, how long do you become restrained? Until they roll with hope, right? That is answered immediately in the clause within that feature. So I don't necessarily need that, right? We're always looking to be the most efficient, to try to streamline, to not write more in a feature than we need to, because we want GMs to be able to read it and reread features really quickly and easily. They must make an instinct reaction roll, or I'm going to say mark a stress and become disoriented. While disoriented, they must mark a stress each time they take the spotlight, or... Okay, so how do we want this disorientation to work? One option is that the feature says that when a disoriented target takes the spotlight, the GM can suggest an action that they take, and the player character can take that action or spend some resource. What that does is it puts the choice back in the player's hands. The GM says, oh, you're disoriented, and so you stagger off to your left and take a swing at the wizard. If we were in the 5e version, right, there's the roll, and the roll is what lets the GM kind of disclaim authority a little bit, right, because it's just what the dice said. But if I, as the player, am annoyed that I don't get control of my character because it's everything, what they do has basically been dictated by a die roll, I don't even get to choose how to interpret it, right? That might be annoying. A way of translating that in the fiction, but in a way that mechanically still gives control to the player, then while a disoriented target takes the spotlight, and this is when... We're going to use our italics here, right, because this is a status. The GM will suggest a course of action they they will take but the player may mark stress instead. This isn't the wording I want. I think there may be features elsewhere in the SRD that have the wording that I want. Right? This is is this in the spy? No, maybe it's the courtesan. Sorry, I just have a lot of these in my head. Anyway, so there's a wording that is the PC must X or pay a cost. So this is going to be okay for a first draft wording, right? So a disoriented target, when they take the spotlight, the GM suggests a course of action that they'll take, but the player may mark a stress instead. The thing that we need here is we need to know how you become not disoriented. A PC clears disoriented when they clear stress, right? So rolling a crit will clear disoriented because you clear a stress when you roll a crit. Taking a rest will let you clear a stress. And I think that the other thing I would want is like if all the Gibbering Mouthers go away, right? That sort of suggests a passive feature where, right, like they have an aura that a gibbering, which then is more like the version in 5e, but I don't know that I want to maintain that. I think I want the gibbering to be a specific move that the GM is making for the adversaries. And then I think a reaction here would be something like, that's going to be the blind spittle, yeah. This is also going to be an action, right? The blinding spittle. And then the formless flesh is going to be reaction when a Mouther is targeted by an attack within very close. Mark a stress to give the attacker disadvantage. Right, so this is another way that the Mouther can be more annoying to hit or be harder to defeat, right? When their Mouther is targeted by an attack. Oh, when to use stress or fear? Sure, let me double check what the so the relevant section for this would be page 18 of the Homebrew Kit. So it says, generally, the more powerful an adversary feature is, the higher chance it should have a cost, whether that be stress or fear. Stress costs naturally limit the number of uses. Fear is usually reserved for an adversary's most powerful feature, with only a small number costing more than one fear to use. So the way I think about it personally is the least impactful features can be free. A more impactful feature should cost stress, especially if you think it's something that should only impact a scene a couple of times, because having it cost stress creates a natural cap on how many times it can be used in a scene, because most adversaries do not have a way of clearing stress. The GM can always improvise a move to have an adversary clear stress, right? Because that's just how the game works. A feature costing fear means that it's coming out of that like dramatic narrative budget that the GM has, right? That big resource that they have. Hey, Pathfinder PhD. I hope that will be useful, and I'll catch you later. So a fear cost is kind of like the biggest cost in one conception, but that move can be used a number of times if the GM continues gathering fear, or they have a big fear pool and they want to spend it down, right? I could change this gibbering to be a fear cost, and that fits thematically because what the Mouthers are doing is it's like screwing with you, and it's a more aggressive feature. So let's say that this is going to be spend a fear, and then Blinding Spittle will be mark a stress. Having two features that require the Mouther to mark a stress put a natural cap on how much it can use these other features that will muck with you. And going back to Gibbering, I will say, or when they take the spotlight and or when there are no Mouthers within a far distance when they take the spot when the PC takes the spotlight, because that they could be thought of as referring back to the Mouthers, and we don't want that confusion. A PC clears disoriented when they clear stress, or when there are no Mouthers within a far distance when the PC takes a spotlight. So I could also do PC clears disoriented when they clear stress, or when they take the spotlight and there are no Mouthers. And there are no Mouthers within a far distance, right? And so that what that says is, hey, once you defeat all these Mouthers, you're not going to be disoriented in the same way, right? That is a mechanical incentivization of just get rid of all these jerks, and it will end this state. Let's do Blinding Spittle, and then I want to go back and look at Gibbering even more, because I think that there's a lot to talk about in features like this that I have opinions about, right? I have lots of opinions about this kind of stuff because I've played RPGs for a long time, and different games in different ways will have mechanics or features or something that ultimately amount to the player does not have control over their character. And I've had experiences with things like that that are just really frustrating. And then I've had other experiences where the character isn't doing what they want to do, but I, as the player, feel like I have a say in the process, right? Where the character isn't under control, but the player has input. And I think that's where I would want to end up with. That's where I would want to end up making a feature like this Gibbering feature, where the player is offered a choice. They are incentivized to do the thing that makes problems for them, because otherwise they have to pay a price or write something else. That spittle is a point, and then it creates a save. Okay, you become blinded. And pick a point within close. All targets within very close of that point must make this was a dexterity save, so this is going to be an agility reaction roll, or become vulnerable until they next take the spotlight. So I'm trying to build some synergy here, right? When the character takes the spotlight is showing up in several of these features. If a character never takes the spotlight after getting hit, after kind of failing their reaction roll against the Blinding Spittle, they will stay vulnerable. So this is incentivizing the player characters to have the characters act more frequently, right? To not take a long time between taking the spotlight. And what that can do is it can generate a greater sense of pacing and momentum, because the spotlight is jumping back and forth between the different characters rather than staying with one character and maybe sitting with their with that character's frustration, which could translate to the player's frustration. There's a lot of different ways that this can pan out, and I'm not going to say that what I'm doing here will guarantee that nobody's frustrated, but those are the things I'm keeping in mind and want to try and talk through. Let's see. Right, the Mouthers are going to just do a lot of stress damage to the player characters, right? Maybe that's the way to go, more so than you lose control of your character. They're just stressful and taxing to fight because you have to kind of tap on your willpower because you're being disoriented and you're being blinded, and right, they're just annoying to fight. But if we frame the features the right way, they're annoying for the character to fight, and they might be a little annoying for the player, but the player still has a lot of agency in approaching how they want to do this. So this gives us 1 passive, 2 actions, and a reaction. 2 of these things, right? The action, the spittle, and the reaction mark a stress. Let's say that we're going to give the Mouther 4 stress, so they could do the Formless Flesh reaction twice and do Blinding Spittle twice. They maybe don't even need that. Maybe they would. Maybe we go back to 3. Gibbering is the big way that they cause frustration here. Okay, I have a course of action. The player can take that action or mark a stress instead. Okay, I like this wording better. The player chooses whether to take that action or to mark a stress. Right? You could also say the player can take that action or mark a stress. So what this does is the GM can suggest a pretty bad course of action, but they can also suggest a more innocuous course of action. Hey, because you're disoriented, I think you would stagger off this way and you would move a close distance away from the fight. And then the player can be like, yeah, sure. Right? That doesn't cause a problem for me. By putting, right, this puts the choice back in the player's hands, which I really like, but it also makes this process very much one that is a dialogue. And the GM can suggest actions that fit the idea of a PC being disoriented, while the player is still in the conversation as co-storyteller, right? We tell the story together. Okay. Looking over our Mouther from the top down. This is a tier 2 skulk. I think I'm just going to turn this into a support because support types are buff and debuff, and this adversary is just all about debuffing the PCs, right? They don't really do a lot of damage. So we're going to make this be a support type. If today's stream was we're making Gibbering Mouthers, right? If I wanted to focus on that, I'd probably make a Skulk Mouther and then maybe a Bruiser Mouther or Ranged Mouther, right? Like a Yammering Mouther or something like that. But anyway, difficulty's 13. It's a little low for a tier 2 adversary, right? Or on the low side of average. They're not that hard to damage. They only have 3 hit points. Maybe I bring this up to 4 to give them a little bit of staying power. They have a +2 to attack, so they're kind of on par with their tier. And their melee bite is not that damaging. But how a Gibbering Mouther hunts, right? What they do is They have aberrant ground, so characters that kind of get close to them or that they get close to can become restrained because they're disoriented, right? They're unbalanced. Then the Mouther gibbers, and it disorients the character. And when they're disoriented, they don't do what they're trying to do, or they don't do what they want to do. The spittle can make them vulnerable. So the other thing I could think about doing here is we could change Blinding Spittle and say, do they become vulnerable and take disadvantage on reaction rolls? So that if you are blinded, you're more likely to become disoriented. That's a knob that we could tweak to make that gibbering more effective. Because right now, but I don't know that we need to, because right we have some features that are interacting. Right, Formless Flesh is defense for them. Blinding Spittle makes them vulnerable. If they're vulnerable, then when the Mouther attacks, the Mouther is more likely to hit. And in the way that Daggerheart works, even decently sturdy characters can only take a few hits. The gibbering means that the character is less likely to be able to do what they want to do in fighting back against the Mouther. And so something else that we have with the Gibbering Mouther is, let's look at their speed, right? They have a swim and move speed of 10. So do we make this be a feature? I think the oozes, right? Some of the oozes have that thing where they only move when they move slowly. The huge green ooze has the literal slow feature, right? That you have to basically spotlight them twice to be able to use them. Or we can look at, I think maybe is it one of the red oozes? Creeping Fire, red ooze. The ooze can only move within very close range as their normal movement. Right, so I'm just gonna copy that language. It's from the SRD, that's fine. The Mouther can only move within very close range as their normal movement. So if you get away from them, they're gonna have a harder time catching up with you. I like having features be alphabetical within subtype, right? If this passive starts with C and this other one starts with A, I would want to put it first. But a movement-oriented one, I think, should come first. This is very much personal taste and a little fiddly, so don't worry about it if this seems irrelevant to you. So we have the movement thing now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is as many or more features than I would want. So I'm going to stop there. If I were going to streamline this adversary, I might remove Formless Flesh and improve their thresholds a little bit, or give them even just one extra HP so that they have a little bit of staying power. The thing that's good about Formless Flesh is that there's a lot of... So the Formless Flesh is a tax on stress for the PC. Blinding Spittle causes the PC to mark a stress, and marking a stress is the cost to act the way you want to when you're disoriented. So if you've been blinded, you're going to lose some of the resource that you need to spend in order to do what you want when you're fighting the Mouther. So there is a state at which the player character no longer has control. If they cannot mark any, if they're out of stress, right? All their stress is marked, they are not going to be able to control their own actions. Maybe that still sucks. That's probably something that I need to playtest, right? Because this is exploring a space where the player and the GM are collaborating on what the character is doing in a way that is a little bit different than how things normally work in the game, because part of the point is with the Gibbering Mouthers is that they are disorienting. But I'm going to leave that here for this example, right? And we're going to scroll down. And I had an air elemental, but Gelatinous Cube. Yes, Gelatinous Cube is what was suggested. So I'm going to go back. Okay. We are almost at an hour, so I think we're going to try to do this ooze, and that may be it, because I am still, as I mentioned earlier, a little... yeah, we're going to go here. Right, my voice is a little strained still from Gen Con. So let's talk about our Gelatinous Cube. And then we're going to go back here, so I have all my stuff ready. Great. So a Gelatinous Cube, let's look at what it does. Armor class 6, super easy to hit, right? Also a challenge rating of 2, so this is probably another tier 2 adversary. This is definitely a skulk, right? Because what's the classic thing that a Gelatinous Cube does, right? It blends in with its space. And then you accidentally step into or drop into a Gelatinous Cube. Hey, thanks for hanging out, Phoebus. So, a Gelatinous Cube is immune to a bunch of things. They are also a little slow to move. They take up their entire space, right? Other creatures can enter the space, but a creature that does so is subjected to the cube's engulf. This is, right, engulf, this kind of operates more similarly to how adversary features operate. So that's going to be maybe a little easier to translate, which is great, right? They're transparent, so you have to spot them. They attack with the pseudopods. That's going to be their main attack. And then engulf is the big thing that they do, right? And so somebody enters the cube, is subjected to engulf, right? That feels like it's a reaction. And then we have the pseudopod, which is an attack. Engulf is move and attack. And then a passive for maybe moving slowly, and a passive for being hard to notice, right? So that's maybe 4 features. That's not too bad. So let's say, right, creeping. I like being clever with naming my features, because this is a way I entertain myself. Do your third-party publication adversary features need to have as much wordplay as the ones that I write? No. But if they don't have them, are you having as much fun writing that adversary? Right? Because when I'm having fun, we get things like the Demon of Despair's features, your friends will fail you, and your struggle is pointless, right? And I tap into the Emperor Palpatine voice because, right, despair. So this is me just having fun. So an inching ooze. I'm just going to go back up here, and I'm just going to steal the same thing, right? They can only move up to a very close distance. We're going to stretch this out to here. And we're going to say camouflage. I wonder, because I can't hold absolutely everything in my head at once, in the SRD, are there any adversaries that have a camouflage feature? Ribbits have camouflage. I'm just doing a Control F within the SRD. So, oh, I bet the tree ant, right? Don't the tree ants have something like this? Yeah, just a tree. Oak treant. Level tier 3 bruiser. Tier 3, so this is a passive feature, just a tree. Before they make their first attack in a fight or after they become hidden, the treant is indistinguishable from other trees until they next act or a PC succeeds on an instinct roll to identify them. All right, so I'm going to take that text and I'm going to copy it over, and then we're going to adjust it to fit the ooze itself. All right, before they make their first attack, cube, right? Because this is a gelatinous cube. Let's go ahead and change the name. And we would also need a right. I just jumped down to features, so we're going to go back and do the other stuff later. Don't worry about it. The landscape around it, right? Let's see. Right, it's transparent, which is why it's camouflaged. This is an instinct roll to identify it. Okay. This is a skulk, so it's going to be weaker, but I think it's going to have some more hit points, right? Because the Gelatinous Cube is big. And this is going to be a pseudopod. Is that spelled correctly? I feel like pseudopod is a word that I've internalized because I'm a fantasy science fiction person, right? It's a weird word. But the pseudopod's going to have a very close range. I don't know that their basic attack does, right? This only has a reach of 5 feet, but I'm going to say that the cube pseudopod has a bigger reach because that makes them... It means that they're going to be a little bit more able to impact the scene. Because I changed the Mouther into a support, we might go back and change their damage to 2d6, but I'm going to leave it for now. I'm just reminded. So this is going to be... Yeah, the U is in the wrong place. Camouflage +2, hungry +2. Right. I like having at least one experience that they could use on offense. And then camouflage is great because the GM could spend a fear to utilize this experience on the rolls that the player characters make to identify the gelatinous cube, right? So if this feature is just transparent, but then the cube has experience in camouflage, now we're using both of those terms, but they're distinct in where they are seen in the stat block, but they support one another. Right? The cube can become hidden as a thing that it does when it takes the spotlight, right? That's just a thing you can do, because the hidden status is a common status in the game, right? It's not a special feature unique status. So this is the cube. Transparent, and then this is going to be engulf. I'm going to put an exclamation mark because it's fun. But this is only going to be mark of stress. This also means that the gelatinous cube can only engulf creatures so many times in a scene. And I think that's probably for the best. And then the other passive is... Okay. right? So this is, you're camouflaged. The PC gets within very close, or within melee in this case because of the wording I'm using, right? Then the cube can immediately use the engulf feature on the PC. To force a target within melee range to make a, and what's the save on engulf? This is a dex save. But should this be finesse or agility? I want to make this finesse because agility reaction rolls are really common. Right? Finesse is about precision of movement. Or, looking at engulf again. I'm just going to grab this whole text because it's big and messy. All right, I'm going to put it here. Okay. Or be consumed by the cube moving into its all right, so if you're engulfed, you're just vulnerable. Right? If a PC, when a, okay, so the other thing we should do is be, there should be a special status that is engulfed. When an engulfed PC takes the spotlight, no. Whenever the cube takes the spotlight, all targets engulfed, it has engulfed, mark, no, take 2d10 direct magic damage, right? Your armor can't save you. Well, can it save you from being melted by weird monster acid? If you have armor on, maybe it isn't direct damage. Maybe this is just magic damage. So, an engulfed target must make a strength roll to escape the cube and clear engulfed. Yeah, ooze and acid will seep through any armor. I feel like direct damage is probably fine here because a tanky character is still going to be tougher. Yeah, Alan Tucker suggests the mark an armor slot, but this feature is a little wordy already. We know that in the kind of green oozes, we have the mark an armor slot language that is used by acidic form and things like that. And a gelatinous cube and green oozes are pretty similar. And must mark an armor slot without effect. That's not quite the language that's used. Without receiving its benefits. All right, let's put it in and see how we feel about it. May escape. The other thing I want is I want characters to be able to reach into the cube and try to pull a character out, right? So somebody else should also be able to make that strength roll. So in revision, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go look through the SRD and find a feature that has that you can do it or somebody else can do it for you, but I'm not going to do it now because that's just going to take too much time. But the idea here is that it tries to engulf you. The cube marks a stress. You have to make a finesse reaction roll or you get swallowed up and you become vulnerable until you escape. And whenever the cube takes the spotlight, everything it has engulfed takes direct magic damage. And must mark an armor slot without receiving its benefits. They can still use armor, but they can't, right? Because this is direct damage. So, to Alan's point, I had that same suspicion, but because this is direct damage, maybe this isn't too many extra words, right? Because it's direct damage and they have to mark an armor slot, but they don't receive the benefits. So it's not too much more. The trick here is that we also need the language for how an engulfed target can escape. That does add to the overall word count of this one feature, but I'm okay with where it is for now. I don't hate this. When a PC moves within melee range of the cube immediately uses its engulf feature on that PC. Now, does the cube need to be hidden while it's doing that, right? The feature says I didn't see it. I might change this to you don't see it or, blending in. But what that does, right? Hide. So a cube will probably start the scene hidden, but I don't know that they are always hidden, Anafir. Right? If you step into a cube and you get consumed, the other people will still be able to see you because the cube is transparent, but the player character isn't. And so if you're in the cube kind of getting burned by the acid, the characters will be able to see like, what's going on? Right? And then they'll probably be able to tell that the cube is there. But the I didn't see it it's what that is doing for me is it is a specific move that says, hey, if they move within melee range of the cube while it's hidden, that's a golden opportunity. And so the cube should immediately use the engulf feature, right? It is a concretization of that element of the GM rules that say when the player characters give you a golden opportunity, you're encouraged to make a GM move. And this feature helps the GM accomplish this thing that is, here's what gelatinous cubes are about, right? They hide in plain sight, and then you fall into them, or you get too close to them, you walk into them, or they kind of creep up on you. So we have two passives, an action, and a reaction. I will almost certainly revise this because it's a little bit wonky, right? It's a little bit involved, but I think it was a great suggestion, and it's good I think it's good in these streams for me to take on adversaries that are a little bit trickier to try to express in Daggerheart design language, because then I'm sharing how I think about addressing those challenges or solving those design challenges, right? If I could adapt Orc Raider number 3, right? If those are more straightforward, maybe I'm not able to share as many insights in terms of how I approach things to see if folks like the way that I talk about things or think through things. Right, dissolve, engulf, hide. I'm going to go grab, right, this description. We go up here. Right, a large acidic cube, transparent but deadly. In its form are quivering cube of slime, as tall as a giant, right? These are big. Is it as tall as a slime or as a giant? Maybe not. I'm going to say, right, cubes are necessarily equal in size. So if I say it's as tall as that thing, that's also saying how deep and how wide it is, right? Because that's a cube. Right? I could also say grown human, so it's all about 6 feet tall. But I think it should be the size of a giant. Transparent but deadly. A quivering cube of slime as tall as a giant, transparent but deadly. In its form are bits of broken weapons, coins, and a partially digested skeleton. And then I don't need this last little bit, right? That's the description. We have motives and tactics. Difficulty, thresholds, HP, stress. There's absolutely a version where we could try to turn this cube into a solo and give it more to do to make, oh no, there's a gelatinous cube, more of a full encounter on its own. I think that's a worthy endeavor because when I think about an encounter with a gelatinous cube, it's usually just that cube. And if that's the case, then mechanically, I would want an adversary stat block that supports having a whole interesting encounter that's just the cube itself, right? Should this also have right, should it be like resistant? The cube is resistant to magic damage, right? Should it have a resistance? Make the skeleton decide be an extra. That's a very funny bit and a fear. I don't know that I'll do that here, but I love the thinking. Right, the skeleton inside is like somehow immune to the acid, but they're like they exist in a symbiotic relationship, right? Like little birds on an elephant or something, right? That take care of mites or whatever. Like maybe rhinos more than elephants, right? And then the skeleton is just hanging out like, "Hi, I'm Carl. Yeah, this cube and I have been together for 300 years." That's a good bit. Okay. I dig that. We're going to get rid of this. So we have our gelatinous cube, and we made a Gibbering Mouther. So we only made 2 adversaries here, but these were both pretty complicated, right? We had to figure out how to make an adversary that's about disorienting a player character and make it interesting to use in Daggerheart while trying to not rob the player of agency. Because for me, that's kind of contra to the design principles of the game, and I personally don't like it. So I want to design an adversary that I could use that I wouldn't get frustrated as a player fighting against. Not frustrated in the like useful frustration, but like not having a fun time. Again, that's personal taste. The gelatinous cube, right? This is just fun. Yeah, right. You could make it a powerful undead, right? Is the gelatinous cube this undead's vehicle, right? Maybe their legs are gone or something, so they can't move around on their own. This is very fun. I like this Anafir. So we have our cube. This we could make this into a solo, right? If this were going to be a solo, I would increase the thresholds, increase the difficulty a little bit, increase the attack, increase the damage, right? Almost all of this would go up by a little bit. The difficulty might only go up by 1 or 2. The HP would probably go up to like 8 or 9 if this is a solo. Especially if I were going to try and make it a solo, don't bother using battle points, just have this be the one thing in the scene solo, rather than solo, this counts as 5 battle points. I think solos are 5 or 4. Anyway, I'm tired. Just gotta double check. I think leaders are 4 points. Yeah, solos are 5, leaders are 4. Bruisers are 4, leaders are 3. Anyway, I didn't make that system. I think it's a great system, but I didn't create it, so I don't, it's not as much in here 24/7, 365 as some of the other things like, oh yeah, this one ooze has a movement thing. Yeah, Anafir, I think these are great, great impulses as in terms of like GM thinking. So I'm just going to move this down so that it's a little bit easier to see on its own. So, right, for illustration's sake, right, let's copy paste and let's do, here's a version of the gelatinous cube that's a solo. So I'm going to make it difficulty 15. This is going to be 11, 22 for thresholds. It's going to have 8 HP, probably 5 stress. Do you use, engulf is mark a stress. Yeah, that's fine. Food pseudopod. And then this is going to be 2d10 plus 3. That might be a little high, but it'll be fine for now. And the attack is going to go up to plus 3 because it's a solo. Maybe I would increase one of these experiences as well, right? I might go hungry plus 3 for when it's attacking. And if I made it a solo, I would probably also include some kind of fear generation engine, right? I might give it relentless, or I might give it more reactions so that I can have it impact the scene more frequently without needing to spotlight it using the standard action economy, right? If it had other reactions. The other thing I could do would be to make it so that when you're engulfed, you have a countdown. And then depending on how the countdown plays, right, you're taking damage every, you use a standard countdown, and every time it ticks down, you would take more damage. That would be really dangerous, right? Because every time you take damage in Daggerheart, with some like feature exceptions, you're going to mark HP or armor. So you just can't hang out in a gelatinous cube that long if it's operating out of that system. I don't know that I would necessarily want that one versus what we have here. This is maybe a little bit simpler, but maybe a solo version uses that countdown so that it creates a lot of pressure on the party to pull somebody out of the cube as quickly as possible. I realized that I wrote an incomplete sentence, right? Can make a strength roll. Yeah, right. Well, why isn't the skeleton totally dissolved? Okay, so we have 2 versions of the cube, and we have our Gibbering Mouther. We're at about an hour and a half. I'm going to call it there, even though I could literally do this all day. This is very fun, especially with folks in the chat hanging out with me. If you are new to my stream, the skeleton would need to be resistant to acid. For Anafir, if you don't know, and for anybody else, Daggerheart only has 2 damage types, right? There's physical damage and magic damage. So there isn't a subtype of acid damage. There may be places where something has a feature that refers to fire or lightning or other things that would be damage types in different games. But Daggerheart does not have, here's the 12 damage types, right? For me, I see this as a reflection of a design principle of trying to avoid too much cognitive load or keeping things streamlined, things like that. So if you like what I did here, if you want to see more of my thoughts about Daggerheart, how I interpret it, how I GM it, things like that, you can go over to my Patreon at patreon.com/MichaelRUnderwood and become a supporter there. I have some stuff that's already there for paid patrons. There's some stuff that's free. Some of these things are going to be free, right? I'll probably just take these 3 stat blocks and put them onto my Patreon for free because they were on a public stream. I have a lot more plans for Daggerheart compatible material that I want to publish. I talk to people at Gen Con. I have more ideas than I can usefully publish at any given time, but I'm excited, and so I'm going to be trying to keep up a sustainable but probably pretty aggressive pace. And if you're interested in seeing these different creations that I'm going to be putting out, then I would definitely encourage you to check out the Patreon. If you're here on Twitch, you can follow and see the other streams that I do. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. The right of the YouTuber says that I must ask you to like and subscribe, and that if you click the bell, you will get notifications. I have performed the incantation that is asking for the like and subscribe, so the gods of the algorithm are appeased. So that's that. And I'm going to be doing more streams, probably at least once a week, sometimes maybe more. But for now, I'm going to stop for the sake of my voice. I'm just going to check really quick if there's somebody that we can raid. I am going to say, let's go raid Escape Artists.